and you can hide them, and there shouldn't be sending any video, Barry. So you guys are reading me good? No feedback?
You sound great.
I'm great.
We're good to go.
Morning, team. Good to see y'all.
Good morning, team.
Okay, so
All right, how you
Getting
doing?
mic'd up as well?
Yes, thank you. Let me get
All right.
Existence. And we know that has created obstacles for people who live in those neighborhoods, people who are largely Black and brown, to be able to participate fully in the American dream. We believe that everybody in this country deserves a chance at a happy life, at a prosperous life, an opportunity to contribute their time and talents to the greater good. We are absolutely committed to helping to create healthy neighborhoods that create broad, deep, durable pathways to prosperity for everybody, so that all of us have a chance at really participating in the American dream.
Looking back on the past year, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank our partners, our team members, our national partners, and folks that we learn from across the country. I want to thank the folks in our partnership who have rallied around the crisis of the moment, and more importantly, I think, lifted their gaze to think about how to disrupt woefully broken status quo, how to challenge injustice, and how to think about and work towards a radically different future. Thanks to everybody who's contributing to this and part of this effort.
In 1988, we saw a need for change, so we began in our own backyard. Because that's the best place to start. We took a leap and started planting the seeds, and those seeds began to grow. From day one, we've worked to strengthen communities through home, health, and opportunity. To us, this is the foundation. What began in our backyard has extended its reach and deepened its roots. Developing and building community, not only in Providence, but all over Rhode Island, is how we're bringing change to our neighborhoods. Our work in the community has been transformational, and we aim for our impact to forever be inspirational. We believe everyone deserves a safe and affordable home, that every neighborhood should be vibrant and healthy, and that every person needs the opportunity to learn and work. We believe in community, and that together, we are one neighborhood builders.
My name is Mariama Barry, and I'm a part of the high school graduating class of 2020. I'm 18 years old, and I've been involved with HCZ my entire life. I was hoping to see you all at Cipriani's earlier this year, but unfortunately, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so this will have to do virtually. When my mother had me, she had just moved to America, so she didn't really have much of a support system, and Baby College actually gave her that support system she was looking for. So in 5th grade, I remember my mom had SVT, and I thought she was going to pass away. Me and my sister were the oldest in the house, so we had to take care of my younger siblings. While I was experiencing this, my teachers noticed, the change in my behavior. They got me a therapist to focus on talking about what was going on in my life. The supportive system I have there, I couldn't find that anywhere else. Throughout my whole high school career, I was looking for programs that I could join. In 9th grade, I was able to join Blue Stamp Engineering. In that program, I was able to learn about electrical engineering. And then I was able to join JP Morgan my junior year of high school. It's a program with mentors that are professional bankers. On August 15th, I'm leaving to go to Syracuse University. My family's gonna be driving me up there. It's about a 5-hour drive. I'm excited, but also nervous because of the pandemic. I'm gonna have online classes and in-person classes, so I'm curious to see how that works out. I'm gonna miss my whole family. After I graduate college, I wanna work in cybersecurity at a tech company. I wanna be able to offer a different perspective and defy the stereotypes that come with being especially a woman in the tech world, and then also a Black Muslim woman in the tech world.
Hi everyone, my name is Tania Pratt. I am a graduating class of Buffalo State 2020. I got involved in Harlem Children's Zone with the grace of God of my grandmother, God bless her soul. She has been part of Harlem Children's Zone since baby college. My grandmother passed about 2005. I was just finishing middle school. I had the help of HCC staff to keep us busy, keep us motivated, keep us active. They also made sure that we were financially stable. Whenever we needed food in our home, they'll make sure that we had food. From middle school into high school, you have guidance. You have advisors who check up on you, make sure your grades is good. And by the time you're ready to go into high school, they're ready for you. They're ready to make sure you get pick the right schools. I was blessed with my #1 school, Food and Finance High School for Culinary Arts, because that is one of my passions. I graduated high school from Food and Finance in 2016. Now I'm here, graduated class of 2020 at Buffalo State. And I'm blessed to say that with this time, I have been able to start my business. On the Plate's background is based on family recipes, traditional foods that my family and I have been passing down for centuries. I have now been doing, I'm gonna say about 2 fish fries a week, and every weekend I've been doing soul food Saturdays, and it's been great. I'm just thrilled that I'm able to even see that my dream is coming true. As for my future plans, I plan on continuing focusing on my business, but also taking some classes for masters starting the year 2021. I can definitely say without HEZ, I don't know where me and my family will be. I don't even know what it looks like to even be a college grad. It warms my heart to know that they're here to support me, and I love them. I'll love them forever.
I feel like HCZ has helped me become a better woman because they've taught me all the skills that I need for the outside world.
Thank you all to the whole Harlem Children's Zone family. I just want to say I am honored to say that Jeff, Kwame, and Miss Ann, I will always love the HC family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Like every single person that contributed to my success. And I also want to thank our new CEO, Kwame Owusu-Kesse. I've known you since middle school as well. So I want to thank you so much. And I can't wait to see what you do for the future of HCZ.
With our program with Lancaster Promise Neighborhood, in 2020, many of our programs, our evidence-based curriculum programs, had to move from being in-person delivery to being virtual. While that was a challenge in and of itself, we persevered and were able to do several cycles of our parenting classes, of our early childhood education classes, and the like. But what our shining star is, or we feel happened in 2020, is our mobilization of our community, our mobilization of volunteers, our mobilization of our partnerships with churches, even more so than before, with churches as well as with our local food bank. We were able to partner with them and deliver weekly student food bags to 3,500 students with a ripple effect of impacting 28,000 family members. Our area is a food desert, and the closest USDA feeding sites were 5 miles away, and many of our students did not have the wherewithal to get to that, even weekly. So we saw the need, we met it, and our students are much the better for it, as well as our community.
My name is Joe, and I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at West London Zone for Children and Young People. Our zone is in one of the most unequal areas of London, indeed our country. We provide social, emotional and academic support that children and young people who are at risk of poor outcomes in later life need to get them on track to thrive in adulthood. We're aiming for an SEA, social, emotional and academic sea change for a whole generation in our community. We build trusted relationships, provide specialist support and join up each child's support system in a personalised 2-year plan for each child. Through trusted relationships with families and our broad and deep network across the public, private and social sectors, we're able to pivot quickly in response to COVID-19. By listening carefully to families, we had an immediate understanding of their needs and were able to support them with access to emergency relief and provision of IT equipment and educational resources for online learning to counter the digital divide. Families confirmed that this immediate reactive support was incredibly valuable during a very difficult time.
In 2016, Oaklanders made a promise to every child in our city, offering them resources and coaching from birth to empower them to complete post-secondary education and succeed in a career of their choice. Oakland Promise was created with equity as a focus, to give kids and their families the opportunity to make this promise a reality. Since its founding, Oakland Promise has opened nearly 800 college savings accounts, given over 20,000 elementary school students early college scholarship funds, and awarded over 1,800 high school seniors with 2 to 4 year college scholarships. We also provide financial coaching to parents of young children, as well as resources and advisory support for students of all ages. Our mission is to engage the Oakland community to advance equity and economic mobility from the cradle to college and career achievement. Over the past 5 years, parents and students have shared the tangible support and hope they've received from Oakland Promise. As a result of our work, college has become more accessible to underrepresented communities. However, in 2020, our challenges have never been greater. The global pandemic exposed just how vulnerable our people and communities are, especially those of color in cities like Oakland. On top of COVID-19, we've also faced a reckoning for the injustices and inequities impacting our Black community for far too long. It is with this context that we are proud to partner with the Harlem Children's Zone, an organization that has solid experience working with youth, especially in the Black community. Their Stay Covered Together campaign, launched in partnership with Oakland Promise and 5 other major U.S. cities, showed the importance of health protocols to protect people from the pandemic. Our work with Harlem Children's Zone has led us on a journey to bridge the digital divide by partnering with others to supply young people with laptops, hotspots, and technology support. Additionally, we were able to distribute thousands of masks and enhance our current programming to minimize learning loss. We continue to provide financial and persistent support through workshops and coaching focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color families from low-income backgrounds. Through our partnership, we recently launched Black Excellence Grants to support our Black scholars and Youth Organizing Grants to directly fund young people's innovative projects to support the Oakland community. Our partnership with Harlem Children's Zone enhances our capabilities to serve Oakland's families and students in this critical time. We are inspired by their work and how it supports ours to lift up the brilliant young people in Oakland to accomplish their career aspirations even in the midst of great challenges. Thank you, Harlem Children's Zone.
2020 was a wild year that revealed so much about ourselves, our communities, our cities, our country, and our world. Up Partnership was proud to lead a strategic funding task force with many funders in our community to look at the hundreds of millions of dollars going into the 0 to 18, the cradle-to-career space in our city, and think about how do we protect these dollars and make sure they don't disappear, and also how do we better leverage these dollars to support young people in our community who are struggling at new and new levels because of all the challenges this year.
I am Dominic Lee, Chief Executive Officer of the Brick Education Network. Our mission is to use our schools to build an ecosystem of supports in conjunction with other partners in the community to support children from prenatal to college and through college. This past year with COVID, we really highlighted the importance of us being an anchor institution in our community. We had to quickly pivot our work to support families around health, housing, and economic supports. As an organization, we've done over 5,000 food deliveries, delivering groceries to our community because they could not leave the house. We, in addition to provided mental health services, and along with that, supporting our families around cash assistance to support them with back rent, food, utilities, and all the things that it takes to run a household. We are now in the process of looking at recovery. We are in the process of recruiting additional partners to support our families around workforce development. In addition, one of the biggest areas that we're working on is supporting our families with other partners and helping them alleviate the mountains of debt that they've incurred during COVID. COVID highlighted the importance of us being an institution that is there to support our community, just not doing academics, but being a holistic partner with them.
The pandemic has stalled economic growth across the country, with Black communities hit disproportionately hard by the health crisis and the corresponding business shutdown. And then there's the virus itself, the disproportionate effects of the virus. The Harlem Children's Zone, meanwhile, aims to raise $50 million for COVID relief in these communities across the U.S. And the Audacious Project has committed $26 million to help them reach that goal. Joining us now with more on how they're supporting communities hit hardest by the pandemic, Jeffrey Canada, president of the Harlem Children's Zone, and Kwame Owusu-Kesse, he is CEO of the Harlem's Children's Zone. Good to see you gentlemen again to update us. Kwame, I've watched the TED speech, and it was easy for me to find. I just searched Kwame and TED, and it comes up comes up immediately. I've watched it a couple of times, and it's very compelling because it encapsulates exactly what we're talking about, and that is the answer that HCZ figured out was cradle-to-career comprehensive action. And this pandemic has thrown a serious obstacle into doing that, but the answer and the solution is the same thing, and that is a comprehensive response to it. Can you just go, I urge people to watch the TED speech, but explain what you were talking about there, Kwame.
Absolutely. So good morning. COVID-19 is a multidimensional threat. And because it is multidimensional, it requires a comprehensive response, which is germane to who we are at the Harlem Children's Zone. And by comprehensive in the context of COVID, we mean we need to have strategies and approaches to address the need for emergency relief funds, bridging the digital divide, the mental health impacts that's having given the toxic stress, the physical health needs, ensuring that folks have masks and public health campaigns, reminding folks the importance to stay covered for each other. So the Audacious opportunity was a fantastic opportunity. As you had mentioned, we were able to raise $26 million. And a little bit about the Audacious platform. It is a collaborative funding initiative that catalyzes capital and places big bets on social impact initiatives. And when we first started this work on the ground in March, when COVID happened, we understood this would devastate Black communities all across America. So now to be able to have a national response all the way from Atlanta to Minneapolis to Oakland is really critical that we marshal these resources for our communities.
Jeff, we need to scale it, and we need money to scale it. And that's the thing you've proven with your tenure, and I think that's why you're ready to pass the reins to Kwame. We know exactly how to do this. Now there's 6 different places. There's Oakland, there's I think Detroit, there's Newark. You take the money and the comprehensive strategy, and I mean, COVID notwithstanding, there are no silver bullets to what we're trying to do, Jeff, but we know how to do it now, don't we?
We do know how to do it, and I'm just so proud of Kwame and what he has done as a national leader. But you're exactly right. This is about bending the curve. You know, people talk about the projections of how many folks are going to get sick and how many folks are going to die. And Kwame and I are thinking, those are our neighbors. Those are our family members. Those are folks in the Black and Latinx community who are the most vulnerable. And we have to do everything humanly possible to stop that from happening. So this is a call to the nation. We know there's a problem. Let's act. We have a plan. We plan to implement it. We plan to save lives.
We're excited to be partnering this year, moving into a new year to rebuild and rethink our community and how we work together. When I think about a place, I think about all the unique characteristics and special things that make it a place and how we can build on those strengths to the future. And we know we'll do this in partnership with the Wilson Institute and the Children's Zone moving forward. So excited about this new partnership together with other cities and to learn from the work that we're doing in Memphis, responding to COVID-19, thinking about the intersection of housing and education, building systems of opportunity from birth to career. This is the work that we've been taking on with our partners here in Memphis, and we're excited to continue to learn from one another and to build off of the great work and experiences of the Children's Zone and the Institute to support our work moving forward. Thank you.
At the Delta Health Alliance, we have been working hard to continue delivering services during a difficult time. Over the past several months, we have invested in social media and virtual services to be a resource for families in the Mississippi Delta during the pandemic. From providing free distance lessons and activities for students, to using food from our Delta Eats Garden program to feed families in need, to providing virtual healthcare visits, we have adapted to the current reality to serve the needs of our communities. And we are meeting those needs in the safest way possible as the rest of the world reopens. We've cleaned our facilities according to CDC guidelines and will continue to follow the guidelines of public health officials in all of our operations. As part of our commitment to adapting our services to the current situation, we have opened our new Promise School this summer, and we're carefully moving forward to provide our Head Start students going into kindergarten with a program to keep them on the path to success. We've applied these same standards to the rest of our programs and services that are so important to our Delta residents. Our world may look different, but Delta Health Alliance's commitment to the Mississippi Delta remains the same. We look forward to continuing the important work that's making a profound difference for so many people. For every stage of life, the Delta Health Alliance is here.
I work for the City of Orlando and proudly give a shout out to my amazing team that has transformed a huge slice of our city's government to, using a phrase coined by Jeffrey Canada, move the needle on academic achievement, juvenile arrests, and teen pregnancies among the 10,000 low-income Orlando children and young adults we serve every single day. We consider ourselves Robin Hoods, methodically, intentionally, and sometimes even sneakily investing city assets in the vital work that previous generations of civil rights leaders and disruptors gave their lives for. When COVID came along and teenagers started hanging out around outside our neighborhood centers, instead of logging on to their virtual classes, we sent our staff out to them with computers and food every single day. And again, coining a phrase of Jeffrey Canada, doing whatever it takes to keep them out of trouble and on track at school. We became the first organization to open learning pods free of charge for low-income children in our city and operation of daily food distribution sites throughout Orlando. I'm proud of my city and wish to encourage all of you in these difficult times with one of my favorite quotes. Stop thinking this is all there is. Realize that for every ongoing war and religious outrage and environmental devastation, there are 1,000 counterbalancing acts of staggering generosity and humanity and art and beauty happening all over the world right now on a breathtaking scale, from flower box to cathedral. Resist the temptation to drown in fatalism, to shake your head and sigh and throw in the karmic towel. Realize that this is the perfect moment to change the energy of the world, to step right up and crank up your personal volume. Right when it all seems dark and bitter and offensive and acrimonious and conflicted and bilious, here's your opening. Remember magic. And finally, believe you are part of a groundswell, a resistance, a seemingly small but actually very, very large impending karmic overhaul, a great shift, the beginning of something important and potent and unstoppable. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Hailing Price, and I serve as our Managing Director of External Engagement here at the Harlem Children's Zone. I also have the distinct honor of helping lead the William-Julius Wilson Institute, our national hub for place-based, people-focused solutions that open pathways to social and economic mobility. Building on a generation of evidence here at HCZ, the Institute is working closely with on-the-ground partners and national collaborators to drive systems change and neighborhood outcomes across the country. In this process, I've had the great pleasure of partnering with a personal hero of mine, a man who needs no introduction, Mr. Jeffrey Canada. Jeff founded the Harlem Children's Zone with a bold vision. That was to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty here in Harlem and to inspire other communities to do the same. In the process, he has developed what the New York Times has called one of the most ambitious social policy experiments of our time. This experiment has inspired federal policy and practitioners around the world. Many of those practitioners are here with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you soon. Now, Jeff may be nationally influential and world-renowned, but here in Harlem, many of us have the pleasure of calling him a thought partner, a mentor, and a co-conspirator in this work that all of us have committed to. So it's with great personal pleasure and pride that I invite you to join me in welcoming our leader, Mr. Jeffrey Canada.
Good morning. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Hailing, for that wonderful introduction. And I have to tell you that when Stan Druckenmiller and I decided we were going to create the Harlem Children's Zone 20 years ago, I dreamed one day that we would see efforts around this country, cradle to career, focused on saving the poorest children and families in America. And I hope this country would finally decide that we're going to end generational poverty. We're going to go to the toughest places in this country, and we're going to make sure those children get to have a chance for the American dream. Today is our national conference, and I am telling you that we have an all-star group of folks who have built this field from one end of America to the other. You're in for quite a day today. And here at the William-Julius Wilson Institute, we're excited to launch this effort to try to save American children and families. Now, this saving America is not hyperbole. Right now, we have our conference happening sandwiched between two huge momentous moments in this country. Yesterday, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And oh, do we need Dr. King's vision in this country right now? A person who said that we've got to change America so that we're not looking at the color of a person's skin and making determinations about whether or not they have value, they have worth. Dr. King set in motion a day of service every year, and this country needs to serve because we have some real work to do. Now, tomorrow, we have an inauguration of Vice President, soon to be President, Joe Biden, and the first African-American Vice President in this country, something that a person like me thought that I would never see in my life, a woman who is both African-American and Asian, leading the #2 position in America. So this is really a momentous moment, but our country has to face some hard truths. And I think finally in this country, after all we've been through, after the movement around George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, as we have watched this country come to grapple with a racial reckoning, we can finally begin to tell the truth about why we face such challenges in America. Well, we can start at the beginning, right from the founding fathers' statement. You look at the Declaration of Independence. Everybody knows these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This country didn't tell the truth about its relationship to the poor, to the minorities, to the enslaved, right from the very beginning. You know, when I was in middle school in the South Bronx, as that community was crumbling around me, I remember going to my history class and our teacher being so happy about the Declaration of Independence, and he read that section to us. And I asked him, did they mean people like me? And he said, no, yes, they did, Jeff. Yes, they meant people like you and your rest of your classmates. We were all black and brown, boys and girls in that class. And he lied to us. From the very beginning, people in this country have been fighting to try and make those words ring true. If they meant that, we would have never had a civil war. If they meant those words, we would have never had a trail of tears as Native Americans were forced from their lands and died walking across the country. If they meant that, we would have never had the Ku Klux Klan, the reign of terror for Black Americans. We would have never had Jim Crow, where they actually legalized apartheid in this country. If we were ready to live up to those founding principles, we would not have needed a women's suffrage movement. And indeed, today, when you look at our country and you look at what we've been through, you see that we are still fighting that same battle. Are we going to guarantee equality for all people? And you wouldn't hear people in the highest places in office in our government telling groups like the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys to stand by. We know what that means. We know the signals that sends out as we struggle with the original sin of this country. So this is a moment in our history that we can begin to tell the truth. We can begin to say, those of us who believe in equity, who believe all of those founding principles, we've got to stand up. And here at the William Julius Wilson Institute, we're trying to start a new movement in this country, a movement where men and women of all colors, of all races, of all nationalities decide we're going to make sure children can grow up believing that they have an equal chance to be successful in this country. So I ask you today to join me. You know, Stan and I now recognize there are great examples of cradle-to-career work going on around this country. You're going to hear about those places. And there's a group of us right now who are part of this conference who have decided that we're going to focus on equity. We're going to focus on the poor. We're going to make sure no matter what region you live in, whether you're African-American living in the inner city or you're a rural white person from rural Kentucky, that we're going to make sure you have a chance, a real opportunity in this country. And when we say that you can pursue life, liberty, that we mean that for everybody. Our conference is calling us to learn how to better serve so we can save this country. And this is a moment, America, where we have to double down on all that we have learned so that we can focus on children and families who need us. You know what? I never thought I would see 400,000 Americans die in a year. Most who didn't have to die, most who are Black and brown folks, that women, and particularly women of color, have lost their jobs at record numbers, that people don't know how they're going to pay the rent. And who is standing between these poor communities and utter calamity? Well, you are. You are. Those of you, I saw you signing up from all over the country. You're the ones who are going to have to keep the American dream alive. So I ask you to join me because, you know, there are a bunch of boys and girls around this country. They're going to be back in school and they're going to put their hands over their hearts when they say that Pledge of Allegiance. And they're going to say, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And you know what? It's time for us to make sure we can have liberty and justice for all the children and families in this country. So we've got a conference. I'm going to tell you, you don't want to miss it. You're going to stand with us as we change America. All right, so let's get to the conference. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kwame Owusu-Kesse, and I am the CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone. And I have the pleasure this morning to be the co-MC to our national convening. Or as Halen would describe it, I might be one of the co-conspirators here at the Harlem Children's Zone. We have a wonderful day ahead, so many national leaders. I was just taking a moment and looking at the chat just to see how wide the representation is across the nation. So this truly is a national convening. As Jeff said, you all are partners in crime with us in terms of living out the American dream. So really, really excited. One of my responsibilities as co-MC is to make sure that we're on time. I take that job very seriously, so we're just gonna jump right into it. And as much as I would love to take full credit for you coming out of retirement, we know that is only partially true, even though I know you love me, so I appreciate it. So the next person we get to introduce had a little impact in terms of you coming out of retirement. So why don't you share a little bit about that, Jeff?
Well, first of all, let me remind everybody that Kwame and I and the folks you'll see at this dais, we've all had our COVID tests.
Indeed,
We've
indeed.
had the rapid test. We're all fine. We want to make sure people know that. And you're right, Kwame. I was on a site visit with Blue Meridian Partners, and we were visiting one of the sites that the bombers are supporting in California. And I was so touched by the tough work they were doing and her commitment to this field and to this work, that I said, you know what, Connie, anything I can do to help you, I'm going to come and do. And when Kwame offered me a chance to come out of retirement, I wanted to do that. Connie is the founder of the Bomber Group, her and her husband. She has been a real force in place-based work. She's also on the board of Strive Together, and we're really excited that she's going to introduce our next speaker. Connie, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I remember that visit. That was inspiring to me too. And good morning, Kwame. Good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to be here celebrating the mission and the launch of the William Julius Wilson Institute. Happy to be in the presence of so many of you who are improving communities all over the country. There's really nothing that makes me feel more hopeful than meeting people in community who are working hard and making progress. And Jeff, we're just so grateful for your leadership and passion in all that you do. Grateful for the team of talented people you've gathered to join you at the Institute. And I promise you this, bringing the Institute to life is going to be so much more fun than retirement, I promise. So Jeff and the work of HCZ helped me understand that community is the agent of change. Neighborhoods and communities can and must heal themselves, but how to do this at scale and with urgency. And Jeff has said to us all, we need to advance from work that impacts hundreds of children to work that impacts hundreds of thousands of children. And so that's really what today's gathering is about. That's what we're all trying to do here together. Jeff's work really contributed to Steve and my decision to focus a significant amount of our philanthropy on highly rigorous and impactful place-based partnerships. We've had the great opportunity to visit many partnerships in the Strive Together and Community Solutions networks, really inspiring local leaders, bringing communities together through a backbone organization facilitating many sectors and programs to link arms and make progress on priority outcomes. And when partners hold each other accountable and we can get multiple players moving in the same direction, we do see results for kids and families. Results like a 60% improvement in early grade reading in Spartanburg elementary schools, and 14 communities that have completely eliminated veteran and/or chronic homelessness. And central to all of this is data. Real-time numbers that accurately describe the problem, as well as revealing which solutions are working or not. So data tells us which neighborhoods and communities most need attention and investment. So, data is central. And speaking of data, I have the good fortune to introduce Dr. Raj Chetty this morning. Dr. Chetty is an incredible force for good. He showed us that inequities do determine the fate of Americans. By translating millions of data points into clear and interesting visualizations, Dr. Chetty proves that place matters. And he fueled conversations on how to address poverty and unlock economic mobility. And while his data sets may tell us that the American dream may be fading, his determination to revive it is most inspirational to me. Like Jeff Canada, Dr. Chetty's work has been a powerful influence on our philanthropy. So Steve and I founded Balmer Group around the same time that Dr. Chetty's groundbreaking study on economic mobility was released in 2015. Yeah, that study that everybody was reading and talking about. And it opened our eyes to many things, but most specifically that African-American men are among those least likely to see economic mobility in their lifetime. His research prompted many passionate discussions in our office and inspired our grant making to recruit more Black teachers, reform juvenile justice systems, and improve community safety in Black and brown neighborhoods. And we wanted to double down to support local leaders in place. So as a supporter and admirer of Dr. Chetty's work, I believe there's probably nobody better to help us understand the challenges of communities, as well as the promise of solutions. So a few things we should all be reminded about Raj. He is the William A. Ackman Professor of Economics at Harvard University, where he received his PhD in 2003. He is the founder and director of Opportunity Insights, and he's a recipient of a MacArthur Genius Fellowship and the 2013 John Bates Clark Medal, which is given to the best American economist under age 40. His current research focuses on the equality of opportunity. How do we give children from disadvantaged backgrounds better chances of succeeding? Because Chetty's research combines empirical evidence and economic theory to help with more effective government policy, we are delighted that he's going to be an advisor to President-elect Joe Biden, using data to guide policy and carve a path forward. So welcome, Raj. So glad you're here with us today.
Thank you so much, Connie, for the very warm introduction. It's a real privilege and honor to be here with all of you today. I'm tremendously inspired by the work of Jeff Canada, by the work of this incredible institute that's being launched, and by all of you. So I see my job here today as trying to provide some of the evidence backbone for really the efforts that all of you are undertaking in communities around the United States. Why does it make sense to focus on place as the key tool to restore the American dream? And so what I'm going to do is share a set of slides reviewing some findings from our recent research, some of which you might be familiar with, and give you a sense of how things are changing in the COVID crisis and where we're looking going forward. Hopefully some insights that will be helpful in shaping your efforts in the future. So I'm going to share some slides here. Hopefully we're seeing these slides on the screen. Just to dive in, I want to focus here on the power of place, and in particular by place, I mean at the very granular level, the block in which you grow up as potentially determining your outcomes in adulthood. But I want to first situate that conversation by zooming out and talking about the American dream in a historical context with this chart here, which shows you a very simple measure of whether kids in America really have a shot at achieving the American dream, kind of as laid out in the principles that Jeff was talking about in his introductory remarks. And so one way that the American dream has historically been conceptualized is that this is a country where through hard work, anyone should have the chance of rising up in the income distribution relative to their parents. And so my colleagues and I set about to ask this simple question: is it actually true that in America, most kids go on to have a higher standard of living than their parents did? And so what we did is, by putting together a bunch of different data sets, calculated the fraction of kids who went on to earn more than their parents did, adjusting for inflation, measuring that statistic based on the year in which kids were born. And so what you can see here is, if you look back at kids born in the 1940s and 1950s, the middle of the last century, it was a virtual guarantee that you were going to achieve the American dream. 92% of kids born in 1940 went on to earn more than their parents did. But if you look at what has happened over time on your screen, you see a dramatic fading of the American dream, such that for kids who are turning 30 today, when we're measuring their earnings, born in the mid-1980s, it's now only a coin flip, a 50-50 shot as to whether you're going to do better than your parents did. These trends are particularly acute for disadvantaged groups, for certain minorities in certain parts of the country. And I think this broad trend is what is underlying a lot of the frustration that people are expressing across the US, that this is no longer a country where it's easy to get ahead. And so, motivated by this dramatic trend, in our research and policy group at Harvard, Opportunity Insights, we have been focused on trying to understand, as Connie put it, that's disillusioning data. How can you restore the American dream? How can we reverse that trend? And our angle for doing that is to take advantage of the moment we're in a different way. You all hear a lot about information technology and big data, companies like Google and Amazon using large data sets to improve the products they offer. Our vision is that type of data, that type of information can perhaps help us address important social and economic policy questions, like how can we restore the American dream? And so what we do is analyze a broad range of interventions from childhood to adulthood. And where this has led us as a starting point is to look at the very sharp local differences in rates of upward mobility, which it turns out, I think, are really critical for understanding how we change the national picture. And so to dive into that data, I want to show you this map here, which shows you the geography of upward mobility in the United States. So what we're doing here is taking about 20 million kids using data from anonymized tax returns, kids born in the early 1980s. We're linking them to their information on their parents, and we're asking, how well do they do as adults when they're 35 years old? How much are they earning based on where they grew up, conditional on growing up in a low-income family? So we take a set of kids who specifically are growing up in families at the 25th percentile of the income distribution, that is, families earning about $27,000 a year. And we ask, what are these kids who grow up in relatively low-income families, how much are they earning as adults? And the map is colored so that blue-green colors represent areas with higher levels of upward mobility. So if you look, for instance, at Dubuque, Iowa, kids growing up in low-income families there, on average, are earning $45,000 a year as adults. So a substantial amount of upward mobility across just one generation. But then if you look in contrast at Charlotte, North Carolina, you're seeing average incomes in adulthood for kids who are growing up in families at the same level of income of only $26,000 a year, essentially no progress across generations, which might be particularly surprising to you for those of you who know Charlotte, because Charlotte's a booming economy, kind of the engine of jobs in the South. Despite that, we have huge swaths of kids who are being left out of that progress in terms of economic opportunity. So after we discovered this very large variation across areas in the United States, the natural question for us became, what is it that's making kids have better chances of rising up in places like the rural Midwest or the Bay Area and San Francisco? And why are opportunities to rise up poorer in places like Charlotte? And can we use that information to unlock how we might increase opportunity throughout the United States? And so what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is share some of the lessons that we have learned over the past few years, and there's more remaining to be learned, on what I think really is driving these differences. So I'm going to focus here principally on the role of place and the role of neighborhoods as being a key factor in driving rates of upward mobility. But I would be remiss not to mention the equally important role of race and racial disparities at this moment in particular in driving differences in upward mobility. And so before I turn to zoom into local neighborhoods, I first want to show you the map that I just put up, breaking the data down separately for Black men on the left and white men on the right. So we're looking at exactly the same data. What are your chances? What are your outcomes in adulthood? How much are you earning as an adult, conditional on growing up in a low-income family, for Black men on the left and white men on the right? Now, when you first look at this map, when I first saw these maps, I thought, okay, it looks like we've put these maps on two different color scales, right? Like a red-yellow color scale on the left and a blue-green color scale on the right. But if you look at the bottom of the slide, in fact, we have not. The maps are on the same color scale. It's just that there are essentially two Americas. There's such a stark racial divide in the United States, even today, that your prospects for upward mobility just look dramatically different for Black men and white men. In particular, the best places for Black men, a place like Boston, for example, you see lower levels of earnings for Black men in Boston than you do in the places with the lowest levels of upward mobility, a place like Charlotte for white men. And so, yesterday I was looking back at some of Dr. King's speeches, and he spoke of two Americas and the fundamental importance of race in the United States. And unfortunately, I think that very much remains the case, despite the progress that's been made, despite the many efforts we've all undertaken. Race still plays a fundamental role in driving these disparities. Now, I just showed you the data here for Black men and white men. I want to also show you the same pair of maps for Black women and white women. And here you see a very different pattern, which is, look at the spectrum of colors on the two maps. They tend to be relatively similar across the two maps. So rates of upward mobility for Black and white women actually are not that different from each other. And so there's something in particular about the challenges that Black men face in rising up in the United States that I think we need to be very deliberate about addressing. So coming back now to the role of place, I want to go back to this map, which shows you the data for everyone, pooling Black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and so forth. And I want to then ask, okay, so what is it? We've seen that race plays some role in driving these differences, but place still matters tremendously. Even among white folks, there are really big differences in opportunity across areas. So what is it that's driving that? And so to dig deeper, what we did next is looked at the data not just across regions, as you're seeing here, but zoomed in to look at the data by census tract, by neighborhood, across zip codes, and so forth. And so to illustrate that, I'm going to toggle over here to this tool called the Opportunity Atlas, which you can access yourself on the web if you want to look up data on your own neighborhoods in your own city, opportunityatlas.org. And I'm going to enter in an address, 539 Sutter Avenue in Brooklyn. And we're going to zoom in there, and we're looking at the same type of statistics on upward mobility that I was talking about earlier. And so here now we're looking at the data in detail, neighborhood by neighborhood in New York City. And so the first thing I want you to see is that the range of colors you're seeing on your screen is the same as what you were seeing in the national maps, right? You go from the darkest reds to the deepest blues. And what that's telling you is you can go 2 miles down the street in New York City, and it's like you're going from Alabama to Iowa in terms of rates of upward mobility. So that's the first illustration that the drivers of economic opportunity are incredibly local. It's not about differences across states or differences across even cities. It's about differences across blocks within a given city. And so to give you one particular illustration of that, I'm going to focus here. What you can do with these data is not just look at the data for everyone. You can look at the data for different subgroups. I'm going to look at the data for Black men in particular, the group that I was just focused on before, and zoom in to this address in New York, 539 Sutter Avenue, which it turns out is called the Van Dyke Public Housing Projects, one of the biggest public housing projects in the Brownsville area of New York, which some of you might know. And what's interesting about this example is if you look on this side of the street, north of Dumont Avenue here in Brownsville, you see a very dark red color in the Van Dyke housing projects. Black men who grow up there have average incomes in adulthood of only $16,000 a year. In contrast, if you just go south of that street to a place called the Nehemiah Houses, a mixed income housing development that was developed in the 1980s, that number jumps up to 28,000, literally on the other side of the street. So that illustrates the hyper-local differences that we see here and elsewhere throughout the United States. You can enter whatever address you like, you'll find similar patterns. So now, motivated by that example, I want to come back here to the slides and show you why place really matters by giving you an example and asking you to think about a set of people who move from, say, the Van Dyke houses, which we just saw has relatively low rates of upward mobility for kids who grow up there from birth. Say they have average incomes of $17,000 a year as adults. And think about kids who move to the Nehemiah houses just south of Dumont Avenue. And what we did in one of our studies is tracked several million families that made moves like this, not just from the Van Dyke houses to the Nehemiah houses, but across neighborhoods across the United States. And we asked what happened when you moved to a place that was more in a blue-green color. What happened to your own prospects? And what you can see when you look at these data, I'm going to first show you this dot here, which shows you what happens to kids who move when they're exactly 2 years old, in this example from Van Dyke to Nehemiah. When we track these kids forward 30 years and look at their incomes as adults, we see that they have average earnings of about $25,000 a year. So that's for kids who move when they're exactly 2. Now we repeat that analysis for kids who move when they're 3, 4, 5, and so on. And what you see is a very clear declining pattern. The later you make that move to a higher mobility area, the less of a gain you get. And if you move after you're in your early 20s, the relationship is completely flat and you get no further gain. So why is this chart important? It shows you that where you grow up really has a fundamental effect on your life outcomes. And in particular, if you spend more years growing up in a better neighborhood, you are going to have better outcomes as an adult, a better shot of achieving the American dream. So place really matters at a fundamental hyperlocal way. So next step in this, naturally, the question to ask is, what is it that's leading to better outcomes in some of these places that I showed you, Dubuque, Iowa, or south of Dumont Avenue in Brooklyn? And what is it that's leading to lower levels of upward mobility in others? So this is really the core of our research agenda at present. We have looked at a variety of different factors that predict these differences in upward mobility. And I'm just listing some of the strongest predictors here. Places with lower poverty rates, so mixed income areas tend to have higher levels of upward mobility. Places with more stable family structures, so a larger share of two-parent families, turns out to be a strong predictor of differences in upward mobility. As you might expect intuitively, very consistent with the Harlem Children's Zone, places with better schools tend to have higher levels of upward mobility. And then finally, places with greater social capital. So I think of social capital as the cohesiveness of a community. Will someone else help you out even if you're not doing well? And it turns out this is kind of a difficult thing to measure, but my sense is an extremely important factor in driving differences in upward mobility. And the next study that we're going to be releasing from Opportunity Insights later this year in a few months is going to be focused on social capital as a determinant of upward mobility, using data from social networks on billions of friendships across the United States. And what we're finding, just to give you a sneak preview, is that the extent to which people are connected to each other is really a core determinant of differences in upward mobility. And I think might be one of the key ingredients to the success of things like the Harlem Children's Zone, where it's more than just changing schools. It's about an entire community coming together to try to produce different outcomes. I want to make one final point here and then wrap up. In the work that you all do, and when I think about these issues, people often ask me, you say neighborhoods are important. What exactly do you mean by a neighborhood? How big is a neighborhood? Is it like the city that I live in? Is it the zip code? Is it my block? And so we can analyze that again with these types of modern data. And so the way we do that, I'm going to illustrate in this chart here, is I just told you earlier that lower poverty rates are associated with higher rates of upward mobility. So if you live in a block with a lower poverty rate, it's associated with higher rates of upward mobility. What I want to do now is an analysis where I look at what the effect of lower poverty rates is in a block that's one away from you. That's the second dot here. And you can see that it has 60% as large an effect as the poverty rate in your own block. Now let's repeat that analysis, looking at the next block over, the block after that, the block after that. And what you see is this incredibly sharp decay, such that poverty rates that are more than, say, half a mile away from your house essentially have no predictive power for your outcomes. And so what this analysis is showing you is that place matters in an incredibly local way. What basically matters are conditions in a half-mile radius around your house. Once I tell you about those conditions, telling you about what's happening beyond that radius doesn't really have that much predictive power. And so when we think about restoring the American dream, the grand national challenge that we face, it looks like the answer lies actually at a very local level, at a half-mile level across the United States. And that's why I think you have to think about things like the Harlem Children's Zone in order to address national problems. I want to wrap up by recognizing the moment we're in. We're doing this on Zoom in the midst of a pandemic. How does all this change in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? And I want to share a bit of data that we've been tracking on that front before I conclude. So in the COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know, and as Jeff mentioned, there have been incredibly disparate impacts across different people in the country. So here, what we did at Opportunity Insights when the pandemic struck us, we thought, how can we use our tools to try to produce as much real-time data as possible so people can understand how the crisis is affecting different places, different people, and so forth. And so we started to work with many private companies to track things like employment, spending, and so forth day by day across the country. And so what you're seeing here first is when you look at employment rates, you see that there's been a dramatic loss of jobs for people in the bottom wage quartile. People making less than $13 an hour fell very sharply when the pandemic hit, and by April 15th was down 40%, 12 million jobs lost. For high-income folks, you see a very rapid V-shaped recovery so that they're basically back to baseline levels of employment within a few weeks. But for low-income folks, you're still down about 6 million jobs. Now, why do I bring this up here? It's another example of disparities being exacerbated here by this health shock. It turns out, again, that place is incredibly important. And the reason place is important here is that, again, I'm going to now show you data for New York City as an example. The reason a lot of people lost their job is that lots of people basically started to self-isolate and not go out and go to restaurants, go to local shops, and so forth. And so if you look at the revenues of small businesses located in different parts of New York, you can see that in the most affluent parts of New York, for instance, around Central Park, small businesses located there, tracking data from credit cards, lost more than 73% of their revenue. They essentially lost their entire business. But if you go up to the Bronx or other parts of the Queens, you see that businesses there lost more like 30% of their revenue, significantly less. So there are really sharp differences by place. Now, who bears the consequence of that? Turns out if you look at low-wage workers, if you happen to be working around Central Park and the Upper East Side and so forth, you had a 60 or 70% chance of losing your job as a worker in the service sector, for example. But if you happen to be working up in the Bronx or parts of the Queens, you had more like a 20% chance of losing your job. And so again, we see these incredibly disparate impacts across nearby places, once again showing how I think this pandemic is going to have really disproportionate impacts on low-income folks in particular parts of the country. So once again, I think recovery is going to have to be place-based. One last result, how is the pandemic going to affect economic opportunities going forward? One piece of data that we've been tracking to look at that is how kids are doing in school as schools went remote. In mid-March, we're tracking data from a platform called Zern, which about 1 million students use in the US to learn math as part of their regular school curriculum. And you can see here that there have been enormous disparities that opened up. Kids in low-income families are now learning much less math after the pandemic hit relative to before. And so I worry that the differences in opportunity that we already started out with are going to be even further exacerbated coming out of the pandemic, which makes the work of this group all the more important. So let me conclude by thanking all of you for the work you're doing in the field to make a difference on these issues. And I hope these data, which you can access freely on this website, and the research that we're doing will help support these efforts going forward. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chetty, for such valuable insights. It's amazing to see how the science backs up what we all intuited for like the last 2 decades.
Yep.
Really excited right now. This is a very special moment for me. We have a star in our midst, Miss Ann Williams-Isom. And as you,
I thought he was talking about me.
Come on, Jeff, it's not about you, it's about Miss Ann right now. Miss Ann is in the building.
Oh my goodness.
Someone who has been a mentor to me, someone I talk to multiple times a week still. She was a lawyer by training.
Not about work though, we talk about family stuff. So we're neighbors, that's what it is.
Lawyer by training, you spent some time in city government. Obviously you were the CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone, so really excited to have you with us here today.
Happy to be here, especially for the launching of this very important work. And Jeff, it makes me think about, many people may not know, but I was at the Administration for Children's Services for over 13 years. That's actually where we met. And you and I co-chaired the Neighborhood-Based Services Subcommittee together that the commissioner put together. And I've been thinking about what Dr. Chetty just talked about, the importance of data at a community level. And I don't know if you remember, I came to you with this idea that we were doing in government. It was called the Top 18 Strategy. And we got data that showed us where the majority of children who were coming into foster care were coming from. And Jeff obviously was at the Harlem Children's Zone, and we were able to use city data, child welfare data, to really even say, like on 143rd Street between 7th and 8th, these are where kids are coming into care. And to really then focus our strategy on that. So this what Dr. Chetty was saying about the importance of neighborhoods and what a neighborhood really looks like and how do we use community level data to make changes is something I've been thinking about and happy to have this moment to talk to you guys about.
Well, you know, so interesting, Ann, because I never worked at the city level, right, for city government, but you were actually working in New York City during a time when child welfare numbers for Black and brown folks were off the charts, and they were going into these systems and we knew they were having their lives destroyed. It wasn't like they were going there and things were better. And this idea that I remember when you came there, you said, we've got to figure out not just what the data says, but what we need to do about it. And that's why I think this idea of going from networks down to neighborhoods, it's at the neighborhoods that you actually can see real difference.
So I want to tell you 2 things. At that time, there were 1 in 10 children in this community that were coming into foster care. And so the side thing, I don't know if you remember this, was that we also wanted to arm the community with the data so that they could hold ACS accountable. Because it was like, why weren't we getting the services into that community that we needed? And Jeff, the only thing I think about today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that was a great strategy. It was using data, it was going into the communities, it was putting the services where they needed to be, and government is the right person to do that. But you know, we never had a conversation about systemic racism and how the neighborhoods were like that because of what communities weren't getting. We didn't talk about how the policies were keeping people in those situations. And why was it that, you know, all of these communities, 80% of them were Black and brown children, and 80% of the kids that came into care were in care, Kwame, because of neglect. And that's code word for poverty. You know, and I feel like we kind of missed that 20 years ago.
I mean, I think we didn't miss it. I think we couldn't talk about race and racism. Then, remember, Giuliani was mayor of New York City. We couldn't talk about race then and think government was going to respond to us. So we had to try to fix a system that was designed in some ways to impact these certain communities without being able to call it by its name. And that was a mistake, right? I sometimes feel like maybe I should have had more courage and just simply said the system was designed to be racist and the way it treated children. But to be honest with you, I just don't think we would have been able to do what we ended up doing, which was actually reducing the number of children in care if we had confronted. You know, America's still struggling with just naming some of this stuff that it's based on race?
It's so fascinating because I think then if you don't really look at what's happening, you come up with other ideas. It's because Black people were poor. It's because they didn't have jobs. It's because, right? All of these things, not thinking that what they really needed was services at the local level in order to be supportive of their families. And I think that's why when I came to the Harlem Children's Zone, I was like, all right, we got this, right? Talk about anti-racist poverty. This is, you know, policies. We were ready to face it by saying, we love these kids and these are our children. And so there is no plan B. So we're going to do what we need to do for our kids.
And what is the opportunity that you all see that we have now that is different from when you all first started?
Well, you know, I think, Kwame, that for the first time, America is coming to grips with the fact that race determines a lot of these policies in a way that's disadvantageous to people of color and to poor people. And you can say that now. We can point to that now. We can actually say that that was designed to hurt certain groups, certain communities. You know, toxic waste sites didn't accidentally end up near Black and brown communities, right? That was a decision intentionally made that undermined those communities. And I think we just have to say that stuff today. And luckily, I think that there's a movement in this country to name some of that. Now, it's not like there's not a lot of pushback, and we're going to get a lot of pushback.
Right.
But the truth is, you can't go into these communities if you're going to be afraid to name race as one of the key variables.
We could talk about health disparities. We could talk about child welfare. We could talk about housing. We can talk about education, right? You had a great talk last week about educational inequities. And I think, Kwame, right, we have to have more courage, not just to name it, that's the first thing, but then to say, what do we want to do? And I'm trying to keep away from the word dismantle, but I'm saying that there were just some things that were not designed for our children and to ensure that our children were successful. And if we don't do that, what will happen is you will continue to get kids to and through college, and then we put them into this racist world that don't want to give them jobs, that doesn't want to respect them. I'm not sure that we get to where we want to if we don't start to have these conversations about how race really affects so much of what we're doing.
That's really powerful. So I'm going to correct you. Say we. It is still we. Listen, you are still very much on the front
I'm sleeping at night.
I'm not letting you off the hook, Mr.
I'm sleeping in a different way.
We know where Fordham University is. I'm from the Bronx.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's always a pleasure to have my mentors together, and we love you.
It's a blessing, and I love you too. Good luck to all of you that are doing this work. It's very important, and there's no more important work that we're doing right now in America.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, taken from what we just heard from Dr. Chetty about the importance of place and place mattering at a local level, I want to now transition the conversation to someone who is well adept to talk about the challenges at the super local level, particularly on the city basis. This is a two-term mayor of Philadelphia, Mr. Michael Nutter. So, Mayor Nutter, how are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. Is that the walk-on music I asked for?
Apparently, you know, we're high tech now. But did you notice Mr. Canada's wardrobe change after his opening remarks? So we're trying to be on the cutting edge of technology and fancy things over here, Mayor Nutter.
I appreciate that, but I have to say, Kwame, I'm confused because
talk to me.
I got an urgent call yesterday on Dr. King Day. I got an urgent call. Jeff Canada must speak to you. I'm like, man, this is like Moses, right? Dad talked to me on Dr. King's Day. You know, he called me to tell me that I had to wear a jacket. That was the whole comment. And then I turned on my screen, and what's he got, a T-shirt on or something?
Nah, there's a number of different outfit changes. So I promise you, he gave you the right guidance there, Mayor Nutter. So, but thank you for spending the time with us.
The only person get me to wear a jacket these days. Go ahead.
Wanted just to jump right into the conversation,
Yeah,
and wanted to talk about the tensions and challenges of trying to target the most devastated in communities with the responsibilities that you have for an entire city. So how did you think about that in your tenure in Philadelphia in terms of balancing, in some ways might be competing priorities to ensure that those that are the most devastated have meaningful services?
Sure. In a more serious way, first, Kwame, thank you very, very much. And seriously to Jeff, thank you for the opportunity to be a small part of this enormous event, the partnership here that's taking place, and a significant turnout that you have. I think governing is always about competing interests. There's a constituency for every service, every program, and every dollar that any government, but especially local government, has. I'm going to start with something I learned from a previous New York City mayor, though, who said to me, as I was coming into office, you can't have a great city if people don't feel safe. And so whether it's New York or Philly or Chicago or some town with 5,000 people in it, that is the first and for me, that is the first and foremost responsibility of any government. It's the safety of its people. When we think about the events of a couple of weeks ago, and so many of us have gone back to whether looking at the Declaration or the Constitution, neither of which were perfect, but they are the foundation for us. When you talk about ensure domestic tranquility, it's in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America. People want to be safe. And so I talk about public safety from a context of being a little Black boy growing up in West Philadelphia in the 60s and 70s. Gangs, police brutality, civil unrest, and many challenges in our city. Some were on fire. And so we fast forward, whatever that is, 50 some years later, and many of the same circumstances face us. Poverty, education, healthcare. I mean, every system has not only been put to the test, but many of them have failed in the COVID environment. Every disparity that we already knew existed, but at times seemed to want to work around or not acknowledge. I was listening to the previous conversation, or talk about race, has been revealed for even those who do not want to see. And so when you're the mayor, when you're the leader, especially executive, I've been a city councilman and an executive, love both, but I really love that second job. It's the question is, what's in the best interests of the overwhelming majority of your citizens? And being strong enough to tell your supporters, this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and to tell those who have a different opinion, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it. If you are worried about getting reelected, you're in the wrong job. Do the right thing is more than a great movie title. And so that's how I tried to govern. And I made, I think we did some good things. We made some mistakes because we're human. Then you own it and then you move on. But this idea, this power of place, we've got to get to a point where people really do understand what it's about, why it's so important. It's where people are, it's where they live. They're not talking about some of the lofty things that others get to talk about and write about and think about. They're living it, they're experiencing it. And so I think governing is very serious, but I start with public safety and then you kind of go from there.
Got it. And one of the things you mentioned is about the competing interests. And one of the topics we hear a lot in today's discussion is this notion about equity and power. So how do you manage the various power dynamics happening at the city level and ensuring that there is equity in the sharing of power or building power for those that are most devastated?
Well, I think it goes back to, again, I came in at the tail end and I love Roger's work. The power is in the data. The evidence is in the data. This is not, well, somebody told me and then, whisper down the lane and a couple of anecdotal stories. And then the next thing you know, you're doing policy. What are the numbers, right? So, for instance, shortly after I came into office, and we were having serious crime problems in Philadelphia, we found that, and that's not the only thing I'm going to talk about, but we found that 65% of the homicides in the city were in 9 police districts out of the 23. That caused us to completely change and shift the way we deployed our officers, because generally everybody got proportionally about the same amount. Well, there are clearly some places in the city that did not need that level of service, and others, needed more. And so we use data to make the decisions. Now, were people upset? Sure they were. They said, well, you're going to make me less safe in order to make someone else safer. No, there's actually not much going on in your neighborhood. I mean, maybe somebody stole somebody's recycling can. Okay. But over here, somebody got shot. So we're going to put our resources where they're best. And so for every instance, how much economic activity is taking place in Black and brown communities and in commercial corridors? Not to be compared necessarily with Center City or your downtown area or whatever, but where are the complaints coming from on the 311 system? And what I tell mayors now is not only do you want to see where the most complaints are coming from, but where are the fewest complaints coming from and why? Because that's also an indicator that some people just don't even bother with that system. They don't think they're going to get anything, and they're not going to waste their time. And so that tells you then you need to put more time and effort into those communities. What's going on in education? What's your high school graduation rate? What are your reading levels? Except data, morning, noon, and night. Should be directing your resources. And then you have to fight off at times the political crowd who, if you got $10 and we have 10 city council districts, right? So the political decision is, oh, you got $10, everybody gets $1. Everybody got a little bit of something, never enough to make anybody really happy or move a needle anywhere. And again, being able to say, no, you're not getting $1 out of this 10 this time. We're going to put $4 over here, another 2 and another 2. I'm working on my math here, and maybe another 2 down there. And some people are just not, right? I think that I'm working with small numbers. I just want to make sure. Right. So, but my real point is, what is your agenda? What is your plan? Can you explain it? And can you back it up? And then be willing to stand at a microphone, at a lectern, and say to the public, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is our expectation. We think this will work. And be intentional about it.
So Mayor Nutter, I want to be mindful of time. There's a number of us who have been working at the local level. And in the last 30 seconds that we have, would love to get any advice from you about how to best engage our local electeds in order to be partners in the fight of comprehensive place-based services.
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure you actually know who your elected officials are. Not just by name, by area. What did they run on? How did they get elected? Who supports them and why? What's their history? What's their track record? What have they been doing with themselves? And I mean, I know we're in COVID environment now, so maybe Zoom is the closest you get to people. But contact them, be in touch with them, both directly and indirectly through social media. I mean, people pay attention. And if it's a collective action, you have to be responsive. So that level of interaction, I think, is key, whether we're in a lockdown or not. Direct contact and conversation. If people don't think you're paying attention, they will go do whatever they want to do.
So it sounds like it's a form of accountability, just to make sure that we're in constant contact and knowing who our local elected officials are. Mayor Nutter, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's always a pleasure when we can get together and connect. Appreciative of the work that you do, and thank you for sharing such valuable insights with us today.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.
I did call Mayor Nutter yesterday, but it was for something a little bit more substantial than to wear a jacket.
He put you out there, Jeff.
I'm gonna get him for it. This next section, this next panel, it's going to be led by one of my dearest friends, Angela Blackwell. What people don't know is Angela was there when the Harlem Children's Zone was just an idea. She was part of an advisory committee, and I learned so much from Angela about data. She created this not-for-profit called Urban Strategies, and she actually taught me why local data mattered. This was before she went to Rockefeller to become a vice president of the foundation, before she created the Policy Link. She's one of the most brilliant people in this country. And before her panel comes on, we're going to introduce a couple of communities around the country that are going to be part of this panel.
Wonderful, wonderful. Looking forward to it.
The achievement gap basically is showing that a high percentage of our children of color do not succeed in school, do not graduate high school, compared to white children.
The education gap is real, the housing gap is real, the employment gap is real, the mental health gap is real. This stuff is real.
Minnesota usually is 1, 2, or 3rd in the country in ACT scores. We're worst in graduating kids of color.
And it's important because this is the future of our workforce. So that's the problem. And the question is, if that is the problem, what's the most effective way, not just to close the gap, but to prevent the gap?
So the Northside Achievement Zone is a collaborative of 33 community-based organizations and 8 schools. And we are working together in a results-driven fashion, holistic approach to end multi-generational poverty, using education and whole family support as the 2 levers.
Then the parents partner with a family coach who works with them to set specific goals for their family. That family coach connects them to our NAS parenting education classes and to our 44 partner organizations who support them to achieve their goals around education, housing, jobs, and health. At the same time, the student works one-on-one with a NAS academic coach to set their own goals for academic success. And where the NAS strategy really makes a difference is that as all this is happening, we're constantly gathering data and measuring their success. And we use that data to make sure all the pieces are working together to support families as they lift themselves out of poverty and move their children along a path to college.
To have NAS to be able to bring all those different resources to the table instead of having to contact all these individual locations, and the family coach working with this family to help them navigate housing, to help them navigate employment, helps to stabilize a family.
They built a great network, a great group of partners, and literally neighborhood by neighborhood, they're making a difference today.
They're our future workforce, and this is future economic prosperity for our region. So yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do for the economic future of our community.
My neighbors who live on my block are not the same as they were yesterday. And they are believing that it is possible that their outcomes for their families, themselves, and for our community can be vastly different than they are today.
Because NAS is not looking at an individual person, they're looking at the whole family. And it starts within the family.
There is not one solution. And so what we've done through the Northside Achievement Zone is we've brought together a myriad of solutions. And we brought them together for the same family and the same children, and it is working.
Knox County has a very high poverty rate, unemployment rate for adults. A large majority of the population here receives government assistance to live on.
We have communities where the median income in 1970 is actually higher than it is now. And during that same time period, the rest of the nation, the median income has doubled. So we're getting left behind in Appalachia. And when parents and grandparents and caregivers are dealing with all this other stuff, it's often the child and their educational journey that's gotten forgotten.
I know some friends that are in homes that are just really unstable. There's drugs, there's arguments all the time.
Students come to school with a lot on their minds. They have a lot of issues at home and they're not always focused and ready to learn because of that.
Your role as a teacher kind of shifts. Of course you want them to learn in the classroom and you do everything you can to help them, but you also want them to feel loved. You want them to be encouraged.
Almost every health statistic that's out there is not really good in this eastern Kentucky area. So anything we can do to start establishing a culture of healthy eaters, exercising, and just the mental, physical, and emotional health stability would be great.
All of those factors coming together have created a place that is hard to live in. But the piece that doesn't speak to is that it's also a place that we love and we want to be able to stay here. programs like Promise Neighborhood brings the community together around how do we make this a better place? How do we create more opportunities? How do we work with residents to recreate Appalachia?
We have some very committed school partners. We work with 3 school districts: Knox County, Corbin Independent, and Barberville Independent.
The more that we can have for our students with all these great programs and initiatives from Berea College, Promise Neighborhood, Health Corps, FAST program, Gear Up, we're able to reach out to our community and we can bring all those resources to help them further their education and become more career and college ready.
Hello, everybody. I'm Angela Glover Blackwell, and we are here to talk about the role of neighborhood organizations and networks in supporting and advancing the work of improving the lives for children by using place-based methods. I'm the founder and CEO of Policy Link, which is a national research and action institute working to advance racial and economic equity. And we believe that local leaders are national leaders because they are the ones who are solving the nation's problems, and they need to be driving policy, local, state, and national, much more than they ever have. Today, we're going to be joined by 3 extraordinary women who are leading work across this country in local communities and at the national level, trying to make sure that our young people have everything they need in order to succeed. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to go into their bios, and I could spend a lot of time talking about who they are, how extraordinary they are, and what they've built. But you've seen a little bit of that, and you're going to hear more about it from them. Go to your summit materials to find out more. The 3 women, and I'll be bringing them on one at a time, are Jennifer Blatz, who is the president and CEO of Strive Together, Dreama Gentry, who is the executive director of Partners for Education, and Sandra Samuels, who's president and CEO of the Northside Achievement Zone. First, let me bring on Jennifer Blatz.
Hi, Angela. It's great to be with you today and this wonderful panel of women.
Thank you. It is so good to see you. And next, I want to bring on Dreama Gentry.
Hey, Angela, Jennifer, it's great to join you all. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And it's wonderful to see you as well. And it feels like old home week to bring on back Sandra Samuels. Sandra.
Hi, Angela. Hello, ladies. Nice to be together with this little power panel.
It's good to see you all. The conversation that I heard this morning and the video, excellent video that we just saw about your work, really drives home the point that hyper-local work is essential in order to achieve the outcomes that we want for children. But yet we know that the power of place movement includes local neighborhood organizations, regional organizations, national organizations, and that things are happening at every one of those levels to make sure that we achieve the results we want at the local level. I want to talk with you, Sandra, to find out more from you about the Northside Achievement Zone and the work that it's been doing for the past decade to really drive and go deep into one neighborhood. How did you begin there, and what has changed over time?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Great question. Well, one, I live here. So I've been living in North Minneapolis for about 24 years and raising my children, and and had been doing all kind of work in the business sector. My husband was in politics. He was a city council member. We wanted to see our neighborhood transform, but we watched a generation of children go to jail, drop out of high school, the ones who played in the sandbox with our own children. And so, as I started looking at this place-based movement and received an investment from the Promise Neighborhood to really, because it became clear that the disparities that we're seeing in Minneapolis are on the ground right here. North Minneapolis is ground zero. We disproportionately have African-American neighbors. And Angela, I do have to say that there is a reason George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. Like it's not a surprise. And the knee on the neck is in education, it's in housing, it's in health, it's in employment, it's in mental health. And for sure, education, if I didn't say that yet. So that's why we said this is ground zero. The outcomes are so disparate. And we compete with any other state for having the worst outcomes in North Minneapolis for Black and brown children. And one of the things in terms of how we've emerged or how we've evolved over the years is, we've gotten deeper with our partners. We no longer talk about parent engagement, we talk about parent power, because that's what it's about. We're working much tighter on systems and policies also. And lastly, even in Minneapolis, we can't do it alone. We now have a statewide network that's working in the power of place-based organizations. Strive Together has really helped us. It's Promise Neighborhoods and Strive communities in the city and in the rural area. And we take our show on the road to the Capitol. We're learning from each other, but we're also getting funding together.
Thank you for that. I want to turn to Dreama. The Partners for Education is really working in Appalachia with the students, really trying to dig in on these educational outcomes and connecting to college and career. How does the hyperlocal fit into your work? When people think about rural, they often are thinking about vast land and miles apart, but still there is the framework of hyperlocal. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Angela. And I think when we think of rural, it really is, you have to think of the region. So we're working in Appalachian, Kentucky, which is 54 Appalachian counties, and it takes me a few hours to drive from one side to the other. But we knew that when we're doing this work, it's not going to impact place and communities unless it is local. And so the short video clip you saw was one of our promised neighborhoods in Knox County, Kentucky. And so what we do as this thinking about the region is take this framework of results, of data and best practice into the location, into the community, and many of our places in Appalachia, it's into the county. And they are the local leaders who, like Sandra said, they live in the place. And they also are the ones that we're hiring to lead the work and to do the work and to engage others. And so they design the program, services, and activities. And so I think what we've realized in rural is that you have to have this framework of results, of data, of best practice, but then you take that in to the hyper-local level and let them be the architects of the programs, activities, and services. And they really have the voice and the power at that point.
And so how have you, Dreama, been thinking about partnerships and local? Partnerships and local, to give people a sense of that.
So for us, the key partner in our work is our public schools. And in our region, most of the schools are public school districts, right? And so our promised neighborhood looks very different than Sandra's and Jeff's and what's happening in other places because it really is centered in the school. So we start those relationships with the schools and the positional leaders there. And then we work to identify who are the other groups working with residents and working. And so today I'm excited. We started partnering with Thompson Scholars, which is in one county, and it's really focused on young people of color in that community that are really trying to think about their own community and developing the interventions and services. And so the partnerships there, and then it's also national partnerships. One of the things we don't have that Sandra has is we don't have the corporate partners, and we don't have the YMCAs and the United Ways and the community-based agencies. So we've had to look nationally to groups like Strive Together, Save the Children, different organizations that also have a commitment to rural and bring those partners into the hyperlocal level. And so we've had to work both building the partnerships at the hyperlocal, but also the national level that has that frame of local.
I thank you. And let's just go to Jennifer. That was a perfect setup. Strive Together is working with national organizations and working with over 70 communities, trying to ensure that every child has a chance to succeed, every child, so that we don't allow for race, ethnicity, poverty, or any circumstance to hold children back. How does your work as a national organization fit in with your partner communities? And how do you see the importance of the hyperlocal work?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. That was the perfect setup. I think both of these conversations really demonstrate how important local neighborhood targeted work really can inform the type of systems transformation that we need to see across communities, across states, and nationally in order for every child to truly be able to thrive and reach their full potential. And so the way that looks on the ground, which I think both Sandra and Dreama gave excellent examples of that, and I'll share a couple more. briefly, are really when we are working to support. We have 70 communities that we work with across the country and support them. We're really working to help them employ what John Powell has called targeted universalism. So if we're trying to change policy at the systems level and really transform systems, we have to take on very targeted strategies. So one example I saw when I was looking through the chat earlier and looking at the panel, that there were a few people from our partnership in Salt Lake, Promise Partnerships of Salt Lake. And so in the greater Salt Lake region, you have 10 distinct neighborhoods. And take South Salt Lake, for instance, the unique characteristics of that community and the demographics of that community, which is the most diverse in the Salt Lake region, a large refugee community. That partnership, that greater regional partnership, has focused very specific targeted strategies in the neighborhood of South Salt Lake. For example, they have created what they've called their community, their grassroots fellows internship program. So they have individuals who are from the community, young people who speak the languages, can be with the community and can take on strategies like signing up children and families for early childhood assessments, as an example. So the neighborhood work, I think some of the examples that were shared earlier, even on the panel with Jeff and Anne and Kwame around looking at neighborhood data, that is one really important piece of the work. The other piece is, I think, speaks to Sandra, your example of parent power and resident power, and really being able to not only look at very local targeted data to inform our solutions, but share power with community, with local residents, with parents to co-develop those solutions. So that is really how Strive Together, as a national network that is focused on building the capability of place-based partnerships, is thinking about the intersection of neighborhood and regional work. It's ultimately to transform those inequitable systems, because we would say they're performing exactly how they're designed to perform. So we have to blow them up, really redesign those systems, but we can't do that without the very targeted local data and local resident power in defining those new systems and new solutions.
Thank you for that. I want to pose 3 questions now and ask you all to weigh in where you think you have the most to add on any one of these. It's so important when people are thinking about place-based work that in addition to the cultural dimensions and the intimacy of place and the proximity that Brian Stevenson talks about, being proximate, we do this to have an impact. What impacts are we seeing that are a result of the neighborhood focus? What levers have we seen are most important to pull to really drive toward the outcomes? And what are the points along the cradle-to-career pipeline where you have found it most difficult to really make an impact? Just jump right in. Sandra, let's start back with you, but others feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so, and it's kind of answers 2 things, Angela, both around what levers and what challenge. So what we've realized is that we can do amazing work on the ground across our housing, health, career, education partners, early childhood, our parenting education classes, amazing work, amazing outcomes, seeing statistical differences in kids who are not getting the same level of supports. And we can do that ground game. But if the air game of policies and systems that so directly impact the ground game are not transformed, we just continue to go backwards. And I realized I had this epiphany. There have been other Sandras. There have been a whole heap of me running nonprofits in North Minneapolis. So why haven't the outcomes changed? And these are good people, great folks doing some great work. And I know it's system. And I just one example, we have arguably the largest gaps in education around the outcomes for Black children and the outcomes for white children. In fact, very recently, our superintendent said, if you're a child in Minneapolis, a Black child, you have a 50% chance of being educated. As of last year, only 22% of Black kids were reading at grade level, 80% of white kids were reading at grade level. So seismic. And when we try to address some policies, Angela, we get hit with a brick wall. But everybody at the Capitol and all the legislators say, we want more equitable state. We really want the achievement gap to go away. One example, can't move this thing, teacher experience. In North Minneapolis, the average teacher experience is 9 years. In the more well-heeled parts of Minneapolis, it is 22 years, right? And there are policies that don't, and then we're not even getting into salary. There's like a 20,000 difference in terms of what teachers in my neighborhood get paid versus teacher in Southwest Minneapolis. We can't change that. I mean, we're working on it. That's just one. I could give you systems issues and policies in housing and career and early childhood, and it mounts up to a real formidable obstacle to upward mobility.
Thanks.
I'll jump in and follow that. I think where we've seen the successes has been those population level indicators like K readiness. We've seen that in our promised neighborhoods increase substantially, academic performance in both math and English language arts. And so we have a structure and we have this way of impacting all kids and increasing those outcomes, those academic outcomes. What I worry about doing this work in rural America, in Appalachia, which has suffered an economic collapse prior to the pandemic, is that if we don't do something as a nation to bring jobs and living wage opportunities into rural places like Appalachia, we're going to see that the young people that are coming through this pipeline may graduate college ready, may go on to college, and we're seeing them go to college, but they have to leave here. They have to leave home. And that's that tension we face. And we see some young people, when they get to that 9th or 10th grade of high school, start to pull back on their excellence and their success because they want to stay home. Right. And so the challenge we face is how do we bring and how do we work within a system to create jobs and opportunities in a place that folks can, young people can thrive, but also have that ladder to economic mobility at home. One thing in the back of my mind is, this pandemic has shown that we can do things virtually. Look at us, we're 400 people across the country learning together. How can we also create opportunities for jobs that are well-paying jobs that require these higher education pieces, but where people hire folks that are not in their same city, right? How do we go, and is there opportunities? And so that's why I'm really excited about the discussions around place, is because it's thinking not just about getting the kids to K readiness and out of high school and into college, but it's also thinking, how do we help the young people, but also transform the community? And to transform rural communities, we're going to have to do a little bit different things than we have to transform urban communities. But what we have to do in that focus is still the same, right? And so that's the struggle, and that's how we're thinking about it.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I think the only thing I agree with Sandra and Dreama completely. And I think the only thing that I would add is, when you're thinking about the systems piece, and one of the key levers that we have as results-driven organizations is the focus on the data. And one question that we've been asking ourselves, and together with our national network of partnerships, is, have we been measuring the right things? We are certainly holding ourselves accountable, and will continue to hold ourselves accountable to moving outcomes, moving the K readiness outcomes, the post-secondary enrollment outcomes, and we will always hold ourselves accountable to that. But to your point, Sandra and Dreama, and what has been discussed today, is we have to look at the systems and how are we measuring those in tracking systems indicators. And together with the network at Strive Together, we've defined this sort of end goal of getting communities to systems transformation as measuring power shifting of power, policies, practices, and resources, and I'm talking about money, in communities. And so how are we looking at that in communities and beginning to measure that, and really leveraging our focus on data and making sure that we're measuring what truly matters to move children.
You have all landed on systems change, coming at it from different directions. One of the things that PolicyLink has always believed is that the most authentic systems change really comes from the wisdom that people have working at the local level. But have you found that working at the local level is an effective way to get to systems change? Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, absolutely. To the degree that we've had any success, and we have had some, right? One is that the state now supports place-based organizations. It never did 5 years ago, both in the city, but also in our rural areas as well. And that was not only a policy change, resource change, but also systems. And it got driven by those of us from local communities. There's 8 local communities now working, city, rural. And we all come to the Capitol with our stories. We all come with our voting power. We all come with our parents and our scholars. And I've seen an increasing willingness to invest in adaptive and innovative processes that change places.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has, and that's been one that's been seismic, Angela. We now get the cities get 2.6 million each biennium from the state, never heard of before. And our rural partners get about 250,000 apiece, and we're trying to get them in base budget. We're already in base budget, but it was the coming together and really made a difference. Wouldn't have happened without the local force.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it now because I've seen it work for Sandra. I still struggle with that rural urban differentiation of investment, and we've talked about that before. But I do think that there is a luxury to being able to work hyper local and to think systems. And I've been doing this work for 23 years. And it's only in the last 3 years that I've even had the space and the time to raise my nose from the grindstone, where I'm worried about those young people every day and making sure they're safe, healthy, supported, and educated, to actually think about systems change. So we're at the beginning of our journey of that. And I do think that one thing we have to change within this field is to provide opportunities for those folks on the front lines to raise up and to look around and to realize they have this luxury of working and provide them with that opportunity, right? And so I struggle. So I'm hopeful, and that's how I spend a lot of my time right now. But I haven't seen it work for us yet because we haven't been able to focus on it.
Absolutely. If I can just add there, I mean, the example of the work in Minnesota and how the coalition building that happened with those place-based partnerships in the state led to policy change, led us at Strive Together to make some investments in other states to build coalitions. And we've seen incredible outcomes. In Texas, they passed historic legislation, $6.5 billion into more equitable education policies as a result of those place-based partnerships, those very local partnerships coming together, rural and urban, coming together with residents, with teachers, with others to advance that policy. But more of that has to happen. Because like you said, Dreama, if you can't pull your head up from the local work, and I was just talking to a group of partnerships in Connecticut about this actually last week, it's how do you do both the hyper local work that is so critical, especially right now in the time of COVID, that there are so many immediate needs that need to be met, and also think at the systems level. So we have to resource that in this field.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to take one of the questions from the audience, which is about COVID. How has COVID impacted your work? And as we try to move toward an equitable recovery, what are some of the most critical roles that network and neighborhood organizations can play?
I could jump in there first. I think what we realized in COVID is that we needed to prioritize. And we looked at the early part of the pipeline and then that part of the pipeline of young people leaving college into post-secondary as the most fragile parts of our pipeline. And so using data to determine that, but also bringing in the voice of young people and parents to influence that was important for us. What we also realized with the pandemic is that there is essential needs that families and young people have that are not being met. And so we also have to bring in to our place dollars that can be passed through to families and to young people and to those on the front lines. You know, we had a family that was struggling because they did not have a refrigerator in their house and their child needed insulin. So they had a cooler on the back porch they were trying to put ice in to do it, right? But we were able, because we finally did get some unrestricted dollars for basic needs, that we were able to help with that one thing. So I think we have to remember we're changing systems and we're trying to do this at the big level, but how do we also continue to meet the needs of kids and families right now in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add, here's the power of place again. When an emergency happens, if you already have a collaborative of trusting organizations and people, then it's just like, all right, where do we go? Where do we start? And so our collaborative of partners across all of these different sectors started meeting weekly and talking about what's going on in housing, who's risking, losing their places, and what do we do there? What resources need to come here? What's happening in early childhood? How many of our centers are closed? What do we need to do here? So it's the power of people in place who become e pluribus unum, out of many organizations, one system of support. And so we were able to the degree that we got dollars, we knew exactly where they needed to flow, because people don't come in pieces, they're whole. They have housing issues, health issues, so on. And was able to just flow $300,000 to our housing partners for rent relief, $300,000 for a cash assistance, 700 instruments for technology. And the other thing that really helped too, Angela, is I want to give a shout out to Harlem Children's Zone and our Audacious project. This national network in an emergency, this national network, knowing the local networks that are networked, where you can get resources to people on the ground quickly in the areas that are most important, has been key. And I'm really appreciative of that partnership.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Jennifer?
I mean, exactly these examples we've seen all across our network of partnerships that we support, really adapting in the moment, using those trusted relationships, but also the skills and capabilities of being able to use data quickly. I think about the problem of the digital divide. So many of our partnerships were able to very quickly create digital heat maps of neighborhoods where broadband internet was needed, where we needed to deploy computers and technology supports to be able to quickly adapt in the pandemic. And so this type of infrastructure is critical for these emergencies and sense of urgencies, but also the long-term work of really transforming systems so that we aren't in this situation when the next emergency happens.
I thank you for your work and for your reflectiveness about it. What you're able to pull out of what you're doing every day is just so powerful. You've reinforced the earlier conversations in talking about, Sandra, lifting up the racial dimensions of what's going on and how that is a reality in which everything is operating. You really have been able to underscore how it's not just parent engagement, but parent power that is so essential for being able to have that ownership that it takes to really create change. You have emphasized how the nuance that is so essential can only be gotten when you're working at the local level, and that nuance can translate into so many different strategies that then need to be lifted up into policy at the regional level, at the national level. And while you're able to have it, you need more infrastructure to be able to have it in real time more quickly and more deliberately. You also have been really very clear about how that trust, that knowledge, that infrastructure in neighborhood can get called on in ways that we don't even anticipate as we're building it. But once you're in that kind of authentic touch with families, you are a vehicle and a real possibility builder for being able to respond to even things as big as COVID. Your leadership is really, really inspiring. I thank you all for this really extraordinary conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I need a moment. I need a moment, Jeff. I need a moment. I have the best job in the world because I have colleagues like them, right? And we get to see the leadership, the grace, the intelligence, the knowledge, the commitment to community, and to be able to learn from them and be in partnership with such an amazing group of leaders.
Well, you know what? You're too young to remember the dream team. When we had to win an Olympic basketball, we got the best professional basketball players in the world. You just saw part of the dream team. That's not the whole team, but that's part of the dream team. people doing the best work in place around in this country. And I want to thank them all for helping to support us today.
Thank you. That was so fantastic.
Well, so here's one of the toughest things that folks are dealing with around the country. What do we do with failing schools? Almost by definition, if you're working in one of these places, your schools are struggling.
Absolutely.
And folks have decided, can I change schools? Or should I work in after school? How do I deal with the education inequality in this country? And this next panel is going to tackle that. It's a tough issue. They're going to tackle that issue. And the person that we have moderating is a person I just have so much respect for, Carol Norton. Carol is the Chief Executive Officer of Purpose Built Communities. She was Executive Director of the East Lake Foundation. And I've been to East Lake. I went to visit their schools, and I'm telling you, first of all, it's a beautiful facility, but what I saw going on inside those schools, I just thought was really important and in many ways groundbreaking. We've asked her to moderate a panel on education so that all of us who are doing this work can kind of get some new ideas about how we tackle this issue. So I want to thank Carol for pitching in. And I think this next session is going to be really, really good.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carol Naughton. I'm the CEO of Purpose Built Communities, and I am delighted to be here with you. At Purpose Built Communities, we believe that everyone has the right to live in a healthy, safe neighborhood that supports them on their journey to becoming everything that they want to be, to become happy, healthy, economically mobile. We do this by working with local leaders to create those kinds of neighborhoods that move the needle on economic mobility, on health outcomes, and on racial equity. We focus on creating healthy neighborhoods that include mixed income housing, a cradle through college education pipeline, and the kinds of community health and wellness partners that help move the needle on the social determinants of health. In all the neighborhoods that we support, there is what we call a community quarterback organization that helps this really complicated, long-term, cross-sectoral work with the community to help achieve the goals that the community has set forth and said that are important to them. We support 28 neighborhoods around the country. And I will tell you, as hard as this work is in every aspect of it, there is nothing harder or more important than creating great opportunities for schools and neighborhood organizations to partner together. If you want to be a neighborhoodist, which is what we call ourselves at Purpose Built Community, it just rolls off the tongue, neighborhoodists, you've got to find ways for all of your partners to really be everything that they can be in a coordinated and helpful way. Today, we're going to talk about why that's necessary and how that's necessary. And we've got two great folks with us who are going to help lead that conversation. One of the things I'm most excited about having these two on our panel is that they both have experience both on the ground in working in communities and schools, and also at the 30,000 foot level and thinking about what are the kinds of policies and systems change that need to be enacted in order to help great things happen in communities. So first, let me introduce Jose Munoz. Jose is the director of the Coalition for Community Schools and a vice president for Equity and Impact with the Institute for Educational Leadership. Welcome, Jose.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Glad you're here. I'd also like to welcome Paul Revel. Paul is the Francis Keppel Professor of Practice and Educational Policy and Administration and the founder and director of the Education Redesign Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Carol. Good to be with you and Jose.
Thank you. We only have a short amount of time, so we're going to dive right into it. First, Paul, we're starting with the premise that partnerships between schools and neighborhood organizations are in fact essential for setting young people on a path to upward economic mobility. Tell us why you believe that's so.
Well, let me start by saying, Carol, I was struck yesterday on MLK Day, reading the New York Times, and there was an article there about some of his speeches and talking about the next speech that he had planned prior to his assassination, which was a warning to the country entitled "Why America May Go to Hell." And it was his challenge to the country to use its vast resources to end poverty and to offer all of God's children the necessities of life. And it struck me in thinking about today that that's a theme for the moment we have. I want to talk really from the 30,000-foot level for a moment. I think we're in this moment where the prevailing winds are changing. I'm an optimist. I see things as positive opportunities here. And the work in which we've heard so eloquently described by so many people on the panel, and so many of you are engaged in this work, I think there's an opportunity in this crisis which contains both danger and opportunity to move this work to the center of our national conversation. Because I think this event, the pandemic, has revealed these to the general public, much like a tidal wave being lifted off the ocean floor, gross, persistent inequities that bedevil the lives of children and families who come to our schools and get in the way of schools being able to do their job. So that's, in a sense, my answer to Jeff's question about what do we do about the schools? Well, the schools only consume 20% of a child's waking hours between kindergarten and grade 12. And in order to change what happens in the schools, we're going to have to change the ecosystem, the neighborhoods, the environment from which children come to schools. And in order to do that, we need to do the good work that all of you are doing and talking about today, is bringing the whole community to the table and describing a new cradle-to-career pipeline that meets every child where he or she is and gives them what they need from the earliest childhood to the time that they get a fulfilling job. So in order to do this, my conviction is that we need to seize this moment to describe a new social compact, a children's accord, in effect, a Marshall Plan to end childhood poverty. And if we're going to do it in combination with the schools, and here we come to the education question, but it's really a community question, we're going to need structure. So for example, at the Education Redesign Lab, where we're dedicated to changing the national conversation about child development and education, we need to build structures like children's cabinets, like Promise Neighborhoods, like Harlem Children's Zones, like Strive Together, putting in place structures where members, leading members, grassroots, grass tops come together to begin to describe in their particular community, what does that cradle-to-career pipeline look like? They need, at the same time, the community needs the capacity, not just to think about this work, but to actually do the work. Schools need the capacity. They're overloaded. The biggest complaint of school people is they don't have time. So at this point, they're going to need the additional capacity to reach out and engage with the community in meaningful ways. And then we need systems to bring coherency to that collaboration, to make it efficient, effective, and inclusive. In conclusion, I just say that we've got to develop the national will to make a major investment, set a priority on doing the kind of work that folks have been talking about today, putting in place the structure, the capacity, and the systems to bring coherency to this work.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's really a compelling case. Jose, now that we've talked about kind of the why and the why now, tell us a little bit about the how. What have you been working on? What have you seen that works in creating the kinds of partnerships between schools and community organizations that are really effective at supporting children?
Yeah, first, Carol, hats off to my peers in the last session. That was fire. Great job, you guys. That was on fire right there. And I couldn't agree more with Paul, and to build off of what they said as far as the structures in place. But instead of giving you different places where things were happening yet, I'll come to that. But I'm gonna give you some themes that popped out. 2020 was a tough year, as everybody knows. And schools and communities did great things, not in spite of what was happening on, but because of it. And so they were primed and positioned because they had structures in place. But more importantly, when we talk about the how, they had processes in place. So most people think of community schools as a wraparound service place. It is way beyond that. This is about community design development. This is the very process in place that Paul talked about, where people actually come to the table frequently enough. Consistency breeds intensity. So when you talk about the how of a community school, if you could think about the nearly 100,000 plus public schools across the country, if they all invested the time and their talent and their treasure in building in, I'm gonna give you an alliteration of the next iteration of community schools. 3 things: communication. Name a building in a community that has more communication power than a public school. Now, I know Paul talked about the waking hour of a child, but if you did nothing else but open 180 days and master the communication of that, you have a captive audience of entire neighborhoods for at least 40% of the year. So communication is one thing that community schools do well, bringing people to place frequently. The next thing, after listening and learning and planning with each other, is coordination. You got to have somebody whose job it is to wake up and put the processes in place so communication turns into some type of plan, and that plan is being executed to create the equity that everybody is looking for. The final C of the alliteration, I'll say collaboration. We talked about collaboration at a system level, but at a neighborhood level, you need a process. Organizers do this well. Community organizers do this really well, but it can't just stop at organizing. It has to continue to lead up the elevation as you introduce this, is as far as the different elevations where we work. So it actually begins to change, to inform and change. The other alliteration I say is the policies, the personal agendas, and the politics. And so some of that, what does it look like across the country? From Albuquerque, New Mexico, my home place where I'm at right now, where a group of community school coordinators in several schools created a hub within a zone, to use the promise zone type theme, to said, this is a census year. This is going to impact our neighborhood over the next 10 years, where they actually increased their participation by like 6%, where you can calculate the 3,000 plus people, and which is about $12 million per year, $122 million a year projected of that increase when a community comes together and begin to design how they begin to plan the future of their community. You have in Buffalo, New York, where family engagement, they met in person at 20 different community schools across Buffalo. Every Saturday, they call it Saturday Academy, where they quickly pivoted and went online and actually increased their parent engagement and participation and planning with parents across. And I can name community after community where different things from out of school time to health began to develop. But the how piece of it is really shifting the mindset from, it's not just the school. Jeffrey, I know you talked about the failing piece. It's not the school that fails. It's not the community that fails. So it's the failed processes that we have. People want to do good. People are doing good, but really executing those 3 C's: communication, coordination, and collaboration, and some of the how.
So one of our observations in this work over the last, 10 years that Purpose-Built's been in life, in my time at Eastlake before that, is that co-location does not automatically translate into collaboration. And you made a really good point, Jose, I think, about having somebody whose job it is to make sure that this collaboration really happens with intentionality. I'd be interested in hearing from both of you about ways that might work, other stakeholders who might play a role, or the way other folks who are involved in this work can support the school that may not have that person right now who can manage all those relationships, right? Who'd like to jump in?
Paul, you mind if I get us started?
No, go ahead, Jose.
Yeah, so right now you talk about that person. Anybody could be that person. When I started off, you talk about the first elevation of work. I was in my 20s in a neighborhood and volunteering. The volunteering led to employment by a nonprofit. Right now, what we're looking at is yes, there's several thousand community schools, but have a list of just under 1,000 community schools and 146 school districts and just under 400 different zip codes. Within that, they're serving over 500,000 children, but there's over 200 different partners: school districts, United Ways, universities, grassroots organizations, who actually have a person that they designate what we call a community school coordinator, but whatever their title is, whose job it is to bring people together, co-design what their future looks like, and mitigate any barriers they have in achieving it.
Paul, I'd love to hear from you on, that right now, 400 plus partners. If you're a principal in an under-resourced school and you've got all these well-meaning folks who say, hi, I'm here to help. What you've been in that leadership position. What are the things that a principal can do right off the bat, in order to be able to bring some kind of structure, some kind of ability to partner really effectively? Because volunteers need leadership, school needs leadership, partners need leadership. What works from your experience?
Well, let me take it from a slightly different angle. There are things principals can do. There are things school systems can do to give the principal the capacity to do the work. But I mean, at base, it comes down to what Jose was talking about. It takes people, somebody who wakes up each day thinking about the work. I've done this work on the ground and established a backbone organization in my home community some while ago. One day I found myself in state government as Deval Patrick, Secretary of Education. And the governor asked us to put together a children's cabinet statewide, and I co-chaired it with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And we brought together all the departments of state government to work on these issues. We had great meetings. We made common cause. We recognized it was all one client. We made commitments to do long-term work, but the work didn't really hit its stride or get going until we actually jointly hired someone. The centrifugal force of our respective silos is just too strong. And while we commit to breaking down silos, you have to put some structure, you have to put some people in place. And what's true at the macro level, like at the state level, is true at the local level. In order to have a relationship, you've got to meet people halfway. And school principals right now don't have the folks to meet outside people halfway. So the other part I wanted to say is, I think that this needs to be pushed to the mayoral level. I was delighted to see Mayor Nutter in the group today. We've focused a lot of our work at Ed Redesign on getting mayors to chair children's cabinets to make the point that this isn't just school work. School people are maxed out right now. There is no additional capacity. So until the community comes together and starts to not only pool its resources and communicate and collaborate, but work on policies that incentivize the building of capacity and backbone organizations at the community level, I don't think you're going to be able to see individual principals accomplish this work on their own.
Certainly not in a sustainable way. Every now and again we see, this amazing, charismatic superhero principal who is able to do things that no one expects them to be able to do. And then when that principal retires or is reassigned to another school, everything kind of drifts back into the way it used to be, right? So I want to come back to this idea of structures and systems. Jose, tell us a little bit about what it takes to ensure that every single school can have these resources, every single partner can do, every single school can have these resources, and the partners can work together effectively in order to drive outcomes for kids.
Yes, everybody in the neighborhood knows this, that the professionals that work there will soon leave. They're going to retire, change jobs. So you got to come up with a regenerative process. That's why I harped on the 3 C's so much, so that it lasts through generations. Now, as far as a system creation of how we can create that, so imagine an area that has multiple neighborhoods that begin a coordinating, like I mentioned with the census. What Paul was talking about and what we see growing around the country, you have Sun Valley Community School Initiative, which has works with 15 different school districts, urban, suburban, and rural. You have like Multnomah County with the Portland area, which is a collaborative of the city and the county and 6 different school districts around the area. I named my own very own, again, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which what I like to call, they put the wedding band on. They put the wedding band on, and they have a joint power agreement between the city, the county, the school district, the United Way, the Hispano Chamber of Commerce, and the university. So together, when they begin to, as Paul mentioned, there's a person just like at the place level, the neighborhood level, who does that in a neighborhood space through a school. There's also a person at that system level, as Paul talked about. I happen to be one of those people as well, who helps manage those communications and actually begin to blend and braid their resources, which includes funding, which includes space, which includes actually processes that they have as far as procurement and how they begin to make it more nimble for the many different organizations who can do place-based, to see place-based work through the many different organizations.
That was a word that I have not thought of in the context of this work, regenerative. And I love that. I think I'm going to steal that and use that.
I didn't make it up, so you can use it.
But that's it. It is building, ongoing capacity. I'd love to hear your thoughts, both of you, as we're about to run out of time. But the connection between early learning and elementary schools, and thinking about partnerships between elementary schools and neighborhoods serving early learning. In our experience, that has been one of the game changers when we've been able to help every little genius in a community have access to high quality early learning, and then work to have those early learning centers partner effectively with the neighborhood elementary schools. We've seen great outcomes. Do you have any experience or any observations that you'd make there, or what we can do to maybe incent principals and others to be thinking about that connective tissue?
Well, I think I'll start off on this if you don't mind. Again, the whole notion goes to the broader design of the cradle-to-career pipeline, which we're in separate silos. We have early childhood one place, we have K-12 another place, higher ed another place. What we've promoted at Ed Redesign is this notion of through a children's cabinet, which is designing that pipeline, have an expectation that the community actually has an individualized success plan for each child and a navigator, much as they do at the Northside Achievement Zone, where there is a family advocate, somebody who follows that child and looks at the child as an individual. One of our big faults in education is batch processing, mass production, but instead see each child for who she is, meet her where she is, give her what she needs inside and outside of school. So if you do this in a chronological, longitudinal way, you'll see that so many of our children don't have access to high quality early childhood. So you start there, and that becomes a lead agenda item on the children's cabinet's agenda, and a point where, from the standpoint of policy and investment, they make it a priority.
Thank you. Jose, I see you just put something in the chat, and I think this will have to be our last word.
Sure. So I'll put a little, the connection with early childhood and elementary you're talking about. I want to make that connection between that video right there is a brief story of a connection between early childhood purpose around social and economic mobility. So in there, the short story is, I got a chance to just see 14 moms who predominantly spoke Spanish, who couldn't participate in their elementary children's education because they had younger children at home. And they couldn't work, some of them couldn't work in America because of their status. So they came together, and the partners that the coordinator worked with them through, the universities, the community colleges, businesses, they formed a preschool co-op. Our state senator, who's now a mayor, now the mayor. And today, all 14 moms graduated with early childhood certificates. Some of them are teachers. 5 of them went on to establish their own business, which they couldn't make money by work for somebody, but they actually could earn money by owning their own business through preschool. So I just wanted to share that without going too much in details. People can take a look at it.
Thank you. I think everybody will want to take a look at that at their convenience. I want to come back by starting or finish up by making the point that Paul made. The time is now. There's a sense of urgency, I think, both on the ground that has been that COVID has in fact re-upped. And I think there's a new opportunity that people understand that investing in people and place together can create great opportunities, a stronger economic future for both individuals and our country. So I think we're on the right track here. Jose Munoz and Paul Revel, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. I'm gonna look forward to continuing the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well, what can I say? They laid out some possibilities for education. And this is what I want to say to the field. All of us are struggling with this education issue. Don't be afraid to just sort of admit we need help. We need to rethink this. We need to make sure these connections are tighter. This is key and critical. And I want to thank Carol for leading that panel. I thought Jose, Paul, you guys were terrific. And we've got a lunch break coming up.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. You know how much I like to eat, Jeff. So this is right on time. Right on time.
But look, right after lunch, we're putting you all to work. So don't go. We've got some breakout groups that we really need the feedback. We've heard a lot. We want to hear from you. We want you to help us begin to shape how this field builds. So we need everybody to come back. We're taking 25 minutes, 25-minute break, and then we're going to be back. We're going to make sure that your time is well spent. And by the way, we've got some great videos of work going on around the country during this lunch break. So let's have a quick one, answer some emails, make a few calls, be back in 25 minutes.
Absolutely. The man said 25 minutes, so we're going to be 25 minutes. So I'm looking at some of y'all on the Zoom. I see you, Tamika. I see you, Melinda. I see you, Jose, Paul. Y'all better be back here. 25 minutes, all right? Enjoy.